The History of Magic by Eliphas Levi. Chapter 1. Primeval Mysteries. The apocryphal book of Enoch posits that certain angels consented to fall from the celestial realm that they might engage in carnal union with the daughters of earth. During that epoch, as the sons of men multiplied, there were born unto them daughters of exquisite beauty. Upon beholding them, the angels, or sons of heaven, were consumed with desire, prompting them to say to one another, "Come, let us select wives from among the human race and beget progeny." Their leader, Samiasa, responded thereupon, stating, "Perchance you shall lack the requisite courage to fulfill this resolution, and thus I alone shall be held accountable for your fall." However, they swore an oath that they would in no wise recant, but rather bring their entire design to fruition. There were 200 who descended upon Mount Armin. From that juncture, the mountain received its designation, which signifies the Mount of the Oath. Hereinafter follow the appellations of those angelic leaders who descended with this objective. Samiasa, chief among them all, Urkabaramil, Azabil, Tamiel, Ramuel, Danil, Azkiel, Serakuil, Asael, Armaz, Batril, Anain, Zavib, Samsavil, Ertril, Turil, Jomiel, and Araziel. They took unto themselves wives, with whom they engaged in intercourse, and to whom they also imparted the knowledge of magic, the art of enchantment, and the diverse properties of roots and trees. Amazarak provided instruction regarding all secrets of sorcery. Barkael was the master of those studying the stars. Akibil manifested signs, and Azradel taught the motions of the moon. This legend within the Kabbalistic Book of Enoch constitutes a variant account of the same profanation of mysteries encountered under a different form of symbolism within the history of Adam's transgression. Those angels, the sons of God of whom Enoch speaks, were initiates of magic. It was this knowledge they communicated to profane men, utilizing incautious women as their instruments. They foundered upon the rock of sensual attraction, becoming enamored of the female sex, and the secrets of royalty and priesthood were extracted from them unawares. As a consequence, primitive civilization collapsed, and the giants, who typified brute force and unbridled appetite, contended with one another for dominion over the world. The world escaped only through immersion in the waters of the deluge, wherein all vestiges of the past were effaced. This deluge symbolized that universal confusion into which humanity is necessarily plunged when it ignores and violates the harmonies of nature. A kinship exists between the fall of Samiasa and that of Adam. The lure of the senses seduced both. Both profaned the tree of knowledge, and both were driven far from the tree of life. It is superfluous to discuss here the views, or rather the simplicity, of those who interpret everything literally, believing that knowledge and life were once manifested in the form of trees. Let us rather confess only to the profound significance of sacred symbols. The tree of knowledge does indeed inflict death when its fruit is consumed. That fruit constitutes the adornment of this world, and those golden apples are the glitter of the earth. In the Arsenal Library, there resides a most curious manuscript entitled The Book of the Penitence of Adam, wherein Kabbalistic tradition is presented under the guise of legend to the following effect. Adam possessed two sons, Cain, who signifies brute force, and Abel, the archetype of intelligence and mildness. Agreement proved impossible between them. They perished at each other's hands, and their inheritance passed to a third son, named Seth. Here, the conflict of two opposing forces is diverted to the advantage of a synthetic and united force. Now Seth, being just, was permitted to approach the entrance of the earthly paradise without threat from the cherub and his flaming sword. In other words, Seth represented primeval initiation. It came to pass that Seth beheld the tree of knowledge and the tree of life incorporated together in such a manner that they formed but a single tree, signifying the harmony of science and religion in the transcendental Kabbalah. The angel bestowed upon him 3 seeds containing the vital power of the said tree. The reference here is to the Kabbalistic triad. When Adam died, Seth, in obedience to the angel's directions, placed the 3 seeds into the mouth of his father as a token of eternal life. The saplings that sprang from these seeds became the burning bush, in the midst of which God communicated to Moses his eternal name, I am that I am, signifying he who is and who is to come. Moses plucked a triple branch from the sacred bush and utilized it as his miraculous wand. Although severed from its root, the branch continued to live and blossom, and it was subsequently preserved within the Arkansas. King David planted the branch on Mount Zion, and Solomon harvested wood from each section of the triple trunk to construct the 2 pillars, Jachin and Boaz, which were placed at the entrance of the temple. These were sheathed in bronze, and the 3rd section was inserted at the threshold of the chief gate. It served as a talisman that hindered unclean things from entering therein. However, certain nefarious Levites removed this obstacle to their unholy freedom during the night and cast it, laden with stones, to the bottom of the temple reservoir. From that time forward, an angel of God troubled the waters of the pool, imparting to them a miraculous value so that men might be distracted from seeking the tree of Solomon in its depths. In the days of Jesus Christ, the pool was cleansed. The Jews, discovering the beam of wood which appeared useless in their eyes, carried it outside the town and threw it across the brook Cedron. It was across this bridge that our Savior passed following his arrest at night in the Garden of Olives. His executioners cast him from it into the water. Subsequently, in their haste to prepare the primary instrument of his passion, they took the beam, composed of 3 kinds of wood, and formed the cross therewith. This allegory embodies all the great traditions of the Kabbalah and the secret Christian doctrine of St. John, which is now utterly unknown. It follows that Seth, Moses, David, Solomon, and Christ obtained their royal scepters and pontifical crooks from the same Kabbalistic tree. In this manner, we may comprehend why the Christ was adored in his manger by the Magi. Let us recur, however, to the Book of Enoch, for greater authority attaches to it than can be attributed to an unknown manuscript. The former is cited in the New Testament by the Apostle St. Jude. Tradition attributes the invention of letters to Enoch. Therefore, it is to him that we must trace back the teachings embodied in the Sefer Yetzirah, the elementary work of the Kabbalah, its compiler, according to the rabbins, being the patriarch Abraham, as the heir of Enoch's secrets and the father of initiation in Israel. In this manner, Enoch would appear to be identical with the Egyptian Hermes Trismegistus. Meanwhile, the famous Book of Thoth, written entirely in hieroglyphics and numbers, would constitute that occult Bible, anterior to the Book of Moses and replete with mysteries, to which the initiated William Postal alludes so frequently throughout his works under the title of the Genesis of Enoch. The Bible states that Enoch did not die, but that God translated him from one life to another. He is destined to return and confound the Antichrist at the end of time, when he shall stand as one of the last martyrs, or witnesses of truth, mentioned in the Apocalypse of St. John. That which is stated regarding Enoch in this respect has also been asserted concerning all the great initiators recorded in Kabbalism. St. John himself, according to the primitive Christians, was saved from death, and it was long believed that he could be seen breathing within his tomb. The explanation is that the absolute science of life preserves against death, just as the instinct of the populace has always led them to divine. Be this as it may, the extant memorials of Enoch are comprised within 2 volumes, the first of which is hieroglyphic in character, while the other possesses the nature of an allegory. The former encompasses the hieratic keys of initiation, whereas the latter chronicles a tremendous profanation that precipitated the destruction of the world and the dominion of chaos succeeding the age of the giants. Saint Methodius, a bishop during the primitive era of Christianity, whose compositions are located within the compilation of the Church Fathers, has bequeathed a prophetic apocalypse that discloses the history of the world through a succession of visions. It is not numbered among the saints' authenticated works. Nevertheless, it was conserved by the Gnostics and has been published in the Liber Mirabilis under the pseudonym of Bermecabus, a designation which unlettered typesetters substituted for B. Methodius, an abbreviation signifying Beatus Methodius. This volume correlates in manifold respects with the allegorical treatise entitled The Penitence of Adam. It recounts how Seth migrated toward the Orient with his kin and thus attained a mountain in the proximity of the earthly paradise. This region was the domain of the initiates, whereas the descendants of Cain devised a spurious or debased magic in India, that land of fratricide, and placed witchcraft into the grasp of the reckless. Saint Methodius prognosticates in a subsequent passage the conflicts and sequential ascendancy of the Ishmaelites, this being the appellation assigned in his Apocalypse to the conquerors of the Romans, of the Franks, who vanquished the Ishmaelites, and subsequently of a mighty race from the north whose incursion shall herald the personal reign of the Antichrist. A universal monarchy shall be established thereafter and shall devolve upon a French prince, following which a reign of justice shall endure for a prolonged cycle of years. We are not occupied with prophecy in the immediate context. Yet it is requisite to observe the discrimination between benevolent and malevolent magic, between the sanctuary of the sons of Seth and the profanation of science enacted by the progeny of Cain. Transcendental knowledge, in truth, is reserved for those who hold mastery over their passions, and virgin nature does not surrender the keys of her nuptial chamber to adulterers. There exist 2 classifications, freemen and slaves. Man is born into the servitude of his passions, yet he may attain emancipation through intelligence. Between those who are already liberated and those who are not yet so, no equality is possible. The province of reason is to command, and that of instinct to obey. Conversely, if one imposes upon the blind the office of guiding the blind, both shall inevitably perish in the abyss. We must never forget that liberty consists not in the license of passion emancipated from law, a license that would prove the most hideous of tyrannies, but rather liberation consists in a willing obedience to law. It is the privilege to discharge one's duty, and only just men may be designated as free. Now, those who abide in liberation ought to govern those who remain in bondage, and slaves are summoned to be released, not from the governance of the free, but from the yoke of brutal passions, in consequence of which they cannot subsist without masters. Concede with us now, for a moment, the veracity of the transcendental sciences. Postulate that there does actually exist a force capable of being mastered, through which the miracles of nature are rendered subservient to the human will. Declare unto us, in such a contingency, whether the secrets of opulence and the bonds of sympathy may be entrusted to brutal avarice, the art of fascination to libertines, or supremacy over other wills to those who cannot achieve the governance of their proper selves. It is terrifying to contemplate the disorders that would ensue from such a profanation. Some cataclysm is required to obliterate the crimes of the earth when all are steeped in slime and blood. Now, it is this condition of affairs that is indicated by the allegorical history of the fall of the angels, according to the Book of Enoch. It is this which constituted the sin of Adam, and hereof are its fatal consequences. Of such nature also was the deluge and its wreckage. Of such, at a later epoch, was the malediction of Canaan. The revelation of occult secrets is typified by the insolence of that son who exposes his father's nakedness. The intoxication of Noah serves as a lesson for the priesthood of all ages. Woe unto those who lay bare the secret of divine generation to the impure gaze of the multitude. Maintain the sanctuary barred. All ye who would spare your sleeping father the mockery of the imitators of Ham. Such is the tradition of the children of Seth respecting the laws of the human hierarchy. However, the latter were not acknowledged by the family of Cain. The Cainites of India fabricated a Genesis to consecrate the oppression exercised by the strong and to perpetuate the ignorance of the weak. Initiation became the exclusive privilege of the high castes, and entire races of humanity were condemned to unending servitude under the pretense of inferior birth. They issued, as it was alleged, from the feet or knees of Brahma. Now, nature engenders neither slaves nor kings, but all men indifferently are born to labor. He who pretends that man is perfect at birth but is degraded and perverted by society is the wildest of anarchists, though he may be the most poetic of maniacs. But in vain was Jean-Jacques a sentimentalist and dreamer. His deep, implicit misanthropy, when explicated by the logic of fanatical partisans, bore fruit in hate and destruction. The consistent architects of the utopia imagined by the susceptible philosopher of Geneva were Robespierre and Marat. Society is no abstract personality that can be held separately responsible for the obstinacy of man. Society is the association of men, defective by reason of their vices and sublime in respect of their virtues, yet in itself it is holy, like the religion which is inseparably bound therewith. Is not religion, as a matter of fact, an association of the highest aspirations and the most generous endeavors? After this manner does the blasphemy of antisocial equality and of right in defiance of duty respond to the falsehood regarding castes privileged by nature. Christianity alone has resolved the problem by assigning supremacy to self-sacrifice and by proclaiming him as the greatest who offers up his pride for society and his appetites for the sake of the law. Although they were the depositaries of the tradition of Seth, the Jews did not preserve it in its plenary purity, but were infected by the unjust ambitions of the posterity of Cain. Believing themselves to be a chosen people, they deemed that God had allotted truth to them as a patrimony rather than as a security held in trust for humanity at large. Side by side with the sublime traditions of the Sefer Yetzirah, we encounter very curious revelations among the Talmudists. For instance, they do not shrink from ascribing the idolatry of the Gentiles to the patriarch Abraham himself. They assert that to the Israelites he bequeathed his inheritance, namely, the knowledge of the true divine names, so that, in a word, the Kabbalah was the lawful and hereditary property of Isaac, whereas the patriarch gave, as they relate, certain gifts to the children of his concubines, and by such gifts they understand veiled dogmas and cryptic names, which were speedily materialized and transformed into idols. False religions and their absurd mysteries, Oriental superstitions, with all their horrible sacrifices. What a bequest from a father to his disowned family! Was it not sufficient to drive Hagar with her son into the wilderness? To their solitary loaf and their pitcher of water, was he compelled to add the burden of falsehood, as a torment and a poison in their exile? The glory of Christianity is that it summoned all men to truth, without distinction of race or caste, though not without distinction in respect of intelligence and virtue. "Cast not your pearls before swine," declared the divine founder of Christianity, "lest treading them underfoot, they turn and rend you." The Apocalypse, or the Revelation of St. John, which encompasses every Kabbalistic secret pertaining to the doctrine of Christ Jesus, constitutes a volume no less arcane than the Zohar. It is inscribed hieroglyphically within the nomenclature of numbers and imagery, wherein the apostle regularly appeals to the erudition of the initiated. "He who possesses wisdom, let him understand. He who holds understanding, let him compute," he declares frequently, subsequent to the delivery of an allegory or the provision of a mystical numeral. Consequently, St. John, the cherished disciple and custodian of all the Saviour's mysteries, did not compose his work for the comprehension of the populace. The Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, and the Apocalypse stand as the magnum opuses of occultism. They contain more significances than terms, their mode of articulation being figurative, akin to poetry, and precise, akin to numerical formulae. The Apocalypse epitomizes, consummates, and transcends the entire science of Abraham and Solomon, a fact we shall demonstrate through the explication of the keys of the transcendent Kabbalah. It is equally astounding to note, at the commencement of the Zohar, the profundity of its concepts and the sublime simplicity of its imagery. It is articulated as follows: "The science of equilibrium constitutes the key to occult science. Forces devoid of balance perish in the void. Thus passed the monarchs of the primordial world, the princes of the giants. They have succumbed like rootless trees, and their position is discernible no longer. Amidst the conflict of unbalanced forces, the ravaged earth lay void and formless, until the Spirit of God established for itself a station in the heavens and ordered the mass of waters. All aspirations of nature were subsequently directed toward unity of form, toward the living synthesis of equilibrated forces. The countenance of God, crowned with luminosity, ascended above the vast ocean and was reflected within its waters. His two eyes were made manifest, radiating with splendor, projecting two beams of light that intersected with those of the reflection. The brow of God and his eyes delineated a triangle in the heavens, and its reflection constituted a second triangle within the waters. Thereby was the number 6 disclosed, representing that of universal creation. The text, which would prove unintelligible in a literal rendering, is translated herein by way of interpretation. The author elucidates that the human form he ascribes to the deity serves merely as an image of his intent, and that God exists beyond expression by human cogitation or representation by any figure. Pascal posited that God is a circle whose center is ubiquitous and whose circumference is nowhere to be found. Yet, how is one to conceive of a circle distinct from its circumference? The Zohar adopts the antithesis of this paradoxical imagery, and concerning Pascal's circle, would instead assert that the circumference is ubiquitous, whereas that which resides nowhere is the center. However, it is to a balance and not a circle that it likens the universal equilibrium of existence. It affirms that equilibrium is omnipresent, as is that central point where the balance remains suspended. We ascertain that the Zohar is thus more compelling and profound than Pascal. Its author proceeds with his sublime reverie as follows: that synthesis of the word, formulated via the human figure, ascended gradually and emerged from the waters, akin to the sun in its rising. When the eyes appeared, illumination was generated. When the mouth was manifested, spirits were created and the word passed into expression. The entire head was revealed, and this consummated the first day of creation. The shoulders, the arms, and the breast arose, and thereupon labor commenced. With one hand the divine image restrained the sea, while with the other it elevated continents and mountains. The image expanded progressively. The generative organs appeared, and all beings began to increase and multiply. The form stood at length erect, positioning 1 foot upon the earth and 1 upon the waters. Beholding itself in its entirety within the ocean of creation, it breathed upon its own reflection and summoned its likeness into life. It declared, "Let us make man," and thus man was created. There exists nothing so exquisite in the masterpiece of any poet as this vision of creation executed by the prototype of humanity. Hereby, man is but the shadow of a shadow, and yet he constitutes the image of divine power. He, too, can extend his hands from east to west. To him the earth is granted as a dominion. Such is Adam Kadmon, the primordial Adam of the Kabbalists. Such is the sense in which he is depicted as a giant, and this explains why Swedenborg, haunted in his dreams by reminiscences of the Kabbalah, asserts that entire creation is merely a titanic man and that we are fashioned in the image of the universe. The Zohar is a genesis of light. The Sefer Yetzirah is a ladder of truth. Therein are expounded the 32 absolute symbols of speech, comprising numbers and letters. Each letter generates a number, an idea, and a form such that mathematics becomes applicable to forms and ideas, even as to numbers by virtue of an exact proportion and a perfect correspondence. Through the science of the Sefer Yetzirah, the human mind is anchored in truth and reason. It accounts for all progress attainable by intelligence via the evolution of numbers. Thus does the Zohar represent absolute truth, whereas the Sefer Yetzirah furnishes the method of its acquisition, its discernment, and its application. Chapter 2. Chaldean Fire Magic. It falls within the realm of probability that Zoroaster is a symbolic appellation, akin to that of Thoth or Hermes. According to Eudoxus and Aristotle, he flourished 6 millennia prior to the nativity of Plato. However, others assert that he antedated the siege of Troy by approximately 5 centuries. He is occasionally depicted as a monarch of the Bactrians, yet the existence of 2 or 3 distinct Zoroasters constitutes another subject of speculation. Eudoxus and Aristotle alone appear to have discerned that his persona was magical. Consequently, they interposed the Kabbalistic epoch of an entire world between the inception of his doctrine and the theurgic reign of Platonic philosophy. In truth, there exist 2 Zoroasters, which is to say, 2 interpreters of mysteries, the one being the son of Ormuzd and the founder of an enlightened pedagogy, the other the son of Ahriman and the author of a profane revelation of truth. Zoroaster is the incarnate word of the Chaldeans, the Medes, and the Persians. His legend reads as a prophecy concerning that of Christ, and hence it must be assumed that he possessed also his Antichrist, conforming to the magical law of universal equilibrium. To the false Zoroaster must be attributed the cultus of material fire and that impious doctrine of divine dualism which produced, at a later epoch, the monstrous gnosis of Manes and the spurious principles of counterfeit masonry. The Zoroaster in question was the father of that materialized magic which led to the massacre of the Magi and condemned their true doctrine first to proscription and subsequently to oblivion. Ever inspired by the spirit of truth, the Church was compelled to condemn, under the appellations of magic, Manichaeanism, Illuminism, and Masonry, all that bore kinship, whether remote or approximate, to the primitive profanation of the mysteries. A notable instance is the history of the Knights Templar, which has been misinterpreted to this present day. The doctrines of the true Zoroaster are identical with those of pure Kabbalism, and his conceptions of divinity diverge in no manner from those of the Fathers of the Church. It is merely the nomenclature that varies. For instance, the triad of Zoroaster is the trinity of Christian doctrine, and when he posits that triad as persisting without diminution or division in each of its units, he is expressing, in another mode, that which is understood by our theologians as the circumcision of the divine persons. In his multiplication of the triad by itself, Zoroaster attains the absolute reason of the number 9 and the universal key of all numbers and forms. However, those whom we term the three divine persons are designated the three depths by Zoroaster. The first, or that of the Father, is the source of faith. The second, being that of the Word, is the well of truth, while the third, or creative action, is the fount of love. To verify the assertions advanced herein, the reader may consult the commentary of Psellus regarding the doctrine of the ancient Assyrians. It may be discovered in the work of Franciscus Patricius on philosophical magic, page 24 of the Hamburg edition, which appeared in 1593. Zoroaster established the celestial hierarchy and all the harmonies of nature upon his scale of 9 degrees. He explains by means of the triad that which emanates from the idea, and by the tetrad all that pertains to form, thereby deriving the number 7 as the archetype of creation. Here concludes the first initiation and the scholastic hypotheses commence. Numbers are personified and ideas transmute into emblems, which at a later period become idols. The Sinoques, the Teletarchy, and the Fathers, ministers of the triple Hecate, the three Amalictes, and the threefold visage of Hypazokos, all these intervene. The angels follow in their order, then the demons, and finally human souls. The stars are images and reflections of intellectual splendors. The material sun is an emblem of the Sun of Truth, which is itself a shadow of that primal source whence all glory springs. This is the reason the disciples of Zoroaster hailed the dawning day and were thus regarded as sun worshippers among barbarians. Such were the doctrines of the Magi, yet they were the possessors, in addition, of secrets which granted them dominion over the occult powers of nature. The totality of these arcana might be termed transcendental pyrotechny, for it was intrinsically allied to the profound knowledge of fire and its governance. It is certain that the Magi were not merely familiar with electricity, but were capable of generating and directing it in manners currently unknown. Numa, who studied their rites and was initiated into their mysteries, possessed, according to Lucius Pison, the art of producing and controlling lightning. This sacerdotal secret, which the Roman initiator would have confined to the kings of Rome, was lost by Tullus Hostilius, who mishandled the electrical discharge and was annihilated. Pliny recounts these particulars on the authority of an ancient Etruscan tradition and mentions that Numa directed his battery with success against a monster named Volta, which was ravaging the district surrounding Rome. In perusing this narrative, one is almost inclined to surmise that Volta, the discoverer, is himself a myth and that the appellation of voltaic piles traces back to the era of Numa. All Assyrian symbols connect with this science of fire, which was the supreme secret of the Magi. On all sides, we encounter the enchanter who vanquishes the lion and controls the serpents. That lion is the celestial fire, while the serpents are the electric and magnetic currents of the earth. To this same great secret of the Magi are attributable all marvels of Hermetic magic, the extant traditions of which still bear witness that the mystery of the great work consists in the governance of fire. The learned Patricius published in his philosophical magic the Oracles of Zoroaster, collated from the works of Platonic writers, from Proclus on Theurgy, from the commentaries on the Parmenides, the commentaries of Hermias on the Phaedrus, and from the notes of Olympiodorus on the Philebus and Phaedo. These oracles are, firstly, a clear and precise formulation of the doctrine stated herein, and secondly, the precepts of magical ritual expressed in the terms that follow. Demons and sacrifices. We are taught by induction from nature that there exist incorporeal demons, and that the germs of evil existing in matter turn to the common good and utility. However, these are mysteries which must be buried in the profundities of thought. Forever undulating and forever leaping in the atmosphere, the fire can assume a configuration akin to that of bodies. Let us proceed further and affirm the existence of a fire which abounds in images and reflections. Term it, if you will, a superabundant light which radiates, which speaks, which recedes into itself. It is the flaming courser of light, or rather, it is the robust child who overcomes and breaks that heavenly steed. Visualize him as vested in flame and emblazoned with gold, or conceive of him naked as love and bearing the arrows of Eros. But if thy meditation prolongeth itself, thou wilt combine all these emblems under the form of the lion. Thereafter, when things are no longer visible, when the vault of heaven and the cosmic expanse have dissolved, when the stars have ceased to shine and the lamp of the moon is veiled, when the earth trembles and the lightning plays around it, summon not the visible phantom of nature's soul, for thou must in no wise behold it until thy body has been purified by the sacred tribulations. Enervators of souls, which they divert from sacred vocations, the dog-faced demons emerge from the confines of matter and expose to mortal eyes the simulacra of illusory bodies. Labor round the circles described by the rhombus of Hecate. Alter thou nothing in the barbarous names of evocation, for they are pantheistic titles of God. They are imbued with magnetism by the devotion of multitudes, and their power is ineffable. When, subsequent to all phantoms, thou shalt behold the shining of that incorporeal fire, that sacred flame whose darts penetrate omnidirectionally through the profundities of the world, hearken unto the utterances of the fire. These astonishing aphorisms, which are derived from the Latin of Patricius, encapsulate the arcana of magnetism and phenomena of far greater profundity, concepts which have not penetrated the hearts or minds of individuals such as Du Potet and Mesmer. We discover the astral light perfectly delineated, alongside its capacity to generate fluidic forms, to reflect language, and to echo the human voice. The will of the adept typified by the stalwart child astride a white steed, a symbol encountered within an ancient tarot card preserved in the National Library. The perils of hallucination stemming from misdirected magical operations. The rationale for enchantments achieved via the employment of barbarous appellations and vocables. The magnetic instrument designated the rhombos, which is comparable to a child's humming top, and the ultimate objective of magical practice, which constitutes the quiescence of the imagination and of the senses into a state of absolute somnambulism and perfect lucidity. It follows from this revelation of the ancient world that clairvoyant ecstasis is a voluntary and immediate application of the soul to the universal fire, or rather to that light, replete with imagery, which radiates, speaks, and circulates about all objects in every sphere of the universe. This application is effectuated by the persistence of a will emancipated from the senses and fortified by a succession of ordeals. Herein comprised the inception of magical initiation. Having acquired the faculty of direct reading within the light, the adept evolved into a seer or prophet. Subsequently, having established communion between this light and his own volition, he learned to direct the former, precisely as the head of an arrow is oriented in a specific trajectory. He transmitted at his discretion either discord or tranquility to the souls of others. He established intercourse at a distance with those fellow adepts who were his peers, and, in fine, he availed himself of that force which is symbolized by the celestial lion. Herein resides the significance of those colossal Assyrian figures holding vanquished lions within their grasp. The astral light is otherwise typified by gigantic sphinxes, possessing the bodies of lions and the countenances of magi. Considered as an instrument subjugated to magical power, the astral light constitutes that golden sword of Mitra employed in his immolation of the sacred bull. Furthermore, it is the arrow of Phoebus which pierced the serpent python. Let us now reconstruct in contemplation the great metropolitan cities of Assyria, Babylon, and Nineveh. Let us restore to their proper station the granite colossi. Let us formulate the massive temples supported by elephants and sphinxes. Let us erect once more those obelisks from which dragons gaze down with scintillating eyes and wings outspread. Temples and palaces tower above these wondrous edifices, forever concealed, yet forever manifested by the reality of their miracles, the priesthood and the royalty, akin to visible divinities of the earth, abide therein. The temple is enveloped in clouds or glows with supernatural brilliance at the behest of the priests. Now it is obscured in the daylight, and again the night is illuminated. The lamps of the temple ignite spontaneously. The gods are radiant. The thunders roll, and woe betide that impious individual who may have invoked upon his own head the malediction of the initiates. The temples shield the palaces, and the king's retainers do battle for the religion of the Magi. The monarch himself is sacred, a divinity on earth. The populace lies prone as he passes, and the maniac who would attempt to cross the threshold of his palace falls dead instantaneously, by the intervention of an invisible hand, and without the stroke of mace or sword. He is slain as if by a thunderbolt, blasted by fire from the heavens. What religion and what power! How mighty are the shadows of Nimrod, of Belus, of Semiramis! What can surpass these almost fabulous cities, wherein such mighty royalties were enthroned? These capitals of giants, capitals of magicians, of personalities identified by tradition with angels and still termed sons of God or princes of heaven. What mysteries have been laid to rest in these sepulchres of past nations? And are we superior to children when we exalt our enlightenment and our progress without recalling these startling memorials? In his treatise on magic, Monsieur Dupotet affirms, with a certain timidity, that it is possible to overwhelm a living being via a current of magnetic fluid. Magical power extends beyond this limit, yet it is not confined within the measures of the putative magnetic fluid. The astral light as a whole, that element of electricity and of lightning, can be placed at the disposition of the human will. What must be done, however, to acquire this formidable power? Zoroaster has just informed us. We must comprehend those mysterious laws of equilibrium which subjugate the very powers of evil to the empire of good. We must have purified our bodies through sacred trials. We must have conquered the phantoms of hallucination and taken corporeal hold of the light, imitating Jacob in his struggle with the angel. We must have vanquished those fantastical hounds which howl in the realm of dreams. In a word, and to utilize the forcible expression of the oracle, we must have heard the light speak. We are then its masters and can direct it, as Numa did, against the enemies of the holy mysteries. But if, in the absence of perfect purity and under the governance of some animal passion, by which we are still subjected to the fatalities of a tempestuous existence, we proceed to this mode of work, the fire which we kindle will consume us. We shall fall victim to the serpent which we unleash and shall perish like Tullus Hostilius. It is not in conformity with the laws of nature for man to be devoured by wild beasts. God has armed him with the power of resistance. His eyes can fascinate them, his voice restrain them, his sign bring them to a pause. We know indeed, as a literal fact, that the most savage animals quail before a steady human glance and seem to tremble at the human voice. The explanation is that they are paralyzed and awe-stricken by projections of the astral light. When Daniel was accused of imposture and false magic, both he and his accusers were subjected by the king of Babylon to an ordeal of lions. Such beasts attack only those who fear them or of whom they are themselves afraid. It is utterly certain that the tiger will recede before the magnetic glance of a brave man, although the latter may be disarmed. The Magi utilized this power, and the kings of Assyria maintained tigers, leopards, and lions in their gardens in a state of docility. Others were reserved in vaults beneath the temples for use in the ordeals of initiation. The symbolic bas-reliefs constitute the proof. They depict trials of strength between men and animals, and the adept, clothed in his priestly garb, controls the brutes by a glance of his eye and stays them with his hand. When such animals are depicted in one of the forms ascribed to the Sphinx, they are doubtless symbolical. But in other representations the brute is of the natural order, and then the struggle seems to illustrate a theory of actual enchantment. Magic is a science. To abuse it is to lose it, and it is also to destroy oneself. The kings and priests of the Assyrian world were too great to be exempt from this danger. If ever they fell, as a matter of fact, pride did descend upon them, and they did therefore fall. The great magical epic of Chaldea is anterior to the reigns of Semiramis and Ninus. At this time, religion had already begun to materialize and idolatry to prevail. The cultus of Astarte succeeded that of the heavenly Venus, and royalty arrogated to itself divine attributes under the names of Baal and of Bel or Belus. Semiramis rendered religion subservient to politics and conquests, replacing the ancient mysterious temples with ostentatious and ill-advised monuments. Notwithstanding this diversion, the magical conception persisted in dominating art and science, impressing upon the edifices of that epoch the hallmarks of peerless power and grandeur. The palace of Semiramis constituted an architectural synthesis of the entire Zoroastrian dogma. To this subject we shall return when elucidating the symbolism inherent in those 7 masterpieces of antiquity designated as the wonders of the world. The priesthood was relegated to a subordinate position vis-a-vis the empire, a consequence of its endeavor to materialize its own authority. The collapse of the former inevitably necessitated the fall of the latter, an eventuality that transpired under the reign of the effeminate Sardanapalus. This sovereign, surrendered to opulence and indolence, debased the science of the Magi to the station of one of his courtesans. Of what utility were marvels should they fail to minister to hedonic pursuits? Coerce, O enchanters, course the winter to yield roses. Double the savor of the wine, and exert your dominion over light to render the beauty of women radiant as that of divinities." The Magi acquiesced, and the monarch drifted from one state of intoxication to another. However, it came to pass that war was declared, and the adversary was already advancing. Such an antagonist might signify little to a Sybarite immersed in his gratifications. Yet it betokened ruin, it betokened infamy, it betokened death. Now Sardanapalus harbored no dread of death, regarding it merely as an interminable slumber, and he possessed the knowledge to evade the travails and humiliations of servitude. The final night arrived. The victor stood already upon the threshold. The city could resist no longer, and the kingdom of Assyria was destined to terminate on the morrow. The palace of Sardanapalus was illuminated, blazing with such resplendence that it cast light over the entire consternated metropolis. Amidst heaps of precious fabrics, amidst jewels and vessels of gold, the monarch convened his final orgy. His women, his favorites, his accomplices, and his degenerate priests encircled him. The tumult of inebriation mingled with the strains of 1,000 instruments. The tame lions roared, and a fume of perfumes, ascending from the palace vaults, enveloped the entire edifice in a heavy cloud. Yet, tongues of flame began to penetrate the cedar paneling, and the frenzied canticles were supplanted by cries of terror and groans of agony. The magic, which in the hands of its degraded adepts had failed to safeguard the empire of Ninus, did at least intermingle its marvels to emblazon the terrible memories of this titanic suicide. A vast and sinister splendor, such as the night of Babylon had never witnessed, seemed suddenly to recede and expand the vault of the heavens. A clamor, resembling all the thunders of the world pealing in unison, shook the earth, and the ramparts of the city collapsed. Thereafter a profounder night descended, the palace of Sardanapalus liquefied, and upon the arrival of the morrow, his conqueror discovered no vestige of its riches, nor even a trace of the king's body or all his luxuries. Thus concluded the first empire of Assyria, and with it the civilization established of old by the true Zoroaster. Thus also terminated magic, properly so called, and the reign of the Kabbalah commenced. Abraham, upon his departure from Chaldea, bore its mysteries away with him. The people of God multiplied in silence, and we shall encounter ere long Daniel confounding the wretched enchanters of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar. Chapter 3. Indian Brahmanism. Kabbalistic tradition recounts that the Indian subcontinent was populated by the lineage of Cain, and to that region, at a subsequent epoch, migrated the progeny of Abraham and Keturah. Regardless, it stands preeminently as the domain of Goetia and illusory marvels. Black magic has endured within its borders, alongside the primordial traditions of fratricide inflicted by the potent upon the feeble, sustained by the dominant castes and atoned for by the pariahs. One might assert concerning India that she is the sagacious matriarch of all idolatries. The dogmas of her gymnosophists would constitute keys to the supreme wisdom were it not that they unlock with greater facility the gates leading to degradation and death. The astounding opulence of Indian symbolism appears to suggest its anteriority to all others, a notion corroborated by the primeval freshness of its poetic conceptions. Yet, the root of its tree appears to have been devoured by the infernal serpent. That deification of the adversary, against which we have previously registered an energetic protest, is displayed therein in all its grossness. The formidable Trimurti of the Brahmins comprises a creator, a destroyer, and a preserver. Their Adinari, representing the Divine Mother or celestial nature, is designated also as Bohani, to whom the thugs or stranglers tender votive offerings of their homicides. Vishnu, the preserver, incarnates solely to destroy an inferior demon, who is invariably restored to life through the intervention of Shiva or Rudra, the deity of death. One is conscious that Shiva constitutes the apotheosis of Cain. However, there exists nothing within this entire mythology that recalls the mildness of Abel. The mysteries of India are, notwithstanding, grandiose in their poetry and singularly profound in their allegories. Yet, they represent the Kabbalah in profanation, and hence, far from sustaining the soul and guiding it towards supreme wisdom, Brahmanism, with its erudite theories, plunges it into gulfs of madness. It was from the spurious Kabbalism of India that the Gnostics derived their reveries, by turns horrific and obscene. It is likewise Indian magic, manifesting upon the threshold of the occult sciences with 1,000 deformities, which terrifies reasonable minds and provokes the anathemas of all discerning churches. It is this fallacious and perilous knowledge, so frequently confounded by the ignorant and by dilettantes with true science, which has implicated all that bears the name of occultism in a general condemnation, to which the author of these pages himself subscribed sincerely prior to attaining the key to the magical sanctuary. For the theologians of the Vedas, God manifests solely as force. All progress and all revelations are determined by conquest, and Vishnu incarnates in monstrous leviathans of the deep and in enormous wild boars, which mold the primeval earth with their snouts. Admitting this, it remains a marvelous pantheistic genesis, and the authors of its fables are lucid, at the very least, in their somnambulism. The 10 avatars of Vishnu correspond numerically to the Sephiroth of the Kabbalah. The deity in question assumed successively 3 animal or elementary forms of existence, subsequent to which he became a sphinx and thereafter a human being. He appeared subsequently as Brahma and, in a guise of assumed humility, possessed the entire earth. He was a child on another occasion, and as such the consoling angel of the patriarchs. Following this, he assumed the mask of a warrior and gave battle to the oppressors of the world. Once again, he was embodied as diplomacy, opposing it to violence, and appears at this juncture to have abandoned the human form to assume the agility of the simian. Diplomacy and violence consumed one another, and the world awaited some intellectual and moral redeemer. Vishnu thereupon incarnated as Krishna. He was prescribed even in his cradle, beside which there watched the symbolical ass. He was conveyed far away to save him from the power of his enemies. He attained manhood and preached the doctrine of mercy and benevolent works. He descended into the inferno, bound the infernal serpent, and returned gloriously to the heavens. His annual festival occurs in August under the sign of the Virgin. Herein lies astonishing intuition concerning Christian mysteries, rendered all the more impressive when we recall that the sacred texts of India were committed to writing many centuries prior to the Christian era. To the revelation of Krishna succeeded that of Buddha, who wedded the purest religion to philosophy of the highest order. The felicity of the world was thus held to be secured, and there remained nothing further to anticipate, pending the 10th and final incarnation, when Vishnu shall return in his proper form, leading the horse of the last judgment, that dread steed whose forefoot is perpetually raised, and when it is set down, the world shall be strewn in atoms. We may observe herein the presence of the sacred numbers and prophetic calculations of the Magi. Gymnosophists and Zoroastrian initiates drew from the same sources, yet it was the false and dark Zoroaster who remained master of theology in India. The ultimate secrets of this degenerate doctrine are pantheism and its legitimate consequence. Absolute. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.